this past week, announced a ban on military-style semi-automatic rifles in the country. She said, and, thankfully she's not very wordy. Today I'm announcing that New Zealand will ban all military-style semi-automatic weapons. We will also ban all assault rifles. We will also ban all high-capacity magazines. We will ban all parts of the ability to convert semi-automatic or any other type of firearm into a military-style semi-automatic firearm. Which they can do that in New Zealand because they don't have a process like the Constitution in which they would have to buck up against. So they can just say they're going to do it and off they go. A couple of things wrong with this. Semi-automatic firearms and military-style semi-automatic firearms work the same way. The only difference between them is the way they look. Now, according to Ardern, the military style is defined by the following. Two types of firearms are now identified as military-style semi-automatics, or MSSAs. A semi-automatic firearm capable of being used with a detachable magazine which holds more than 5 cartridges, or a semi-automatic shotgun capable of being used with a detachable magazine which holds more than 5 cartridges. See, these people obviously only have ever seen guns when they watch The Good and the Bad, the Ugly, when Eli Wallach is in there building his gun out of, making his Frankenstein gun, and he goes, cartridges. Those are rounds. Rounds are made of brass and primers and powder and the bullet itself. The bullet flies down range. The new bans are effective immediately, although they will go through Parliament for a vote. Ardern said sellers should halt the sales of banned weapons immediately and warn shops to return their stockpiles to suppliers. Residents caught with the banned guns will face the penalties, including fines of up to $4,000 and or 3 years in prison. No idea how long they have to actually try to comply. And this is what happens when you have a parliamentary style of government with a person who can make this sort of a decree when it's basically put together this way. Now, Democrat presidential candidate and socialist in chief Bernie Sanders endorsed the move right away and said it needs to happen in the United States. He also wants the capability of stripping you of your Second Amendment right overnight. And based on the specific criteria outlined in the New Zealand ban, Sanders is calling for a ban on essentially every firearm in the United States. The functional definition of assault rifle in this case includes nearly all firearms in regular, legal, and proper use by millions of Americans, to include pistols. New Zealand doesn't have a Second Amendment. The United States of America does. And as a reminder, the man who helped stop the horrific mass shooting, which has prompted these extreme measures, chased the shooter away with a semi-automatic handgun, which will fall afoul to this. Well, maybe they're only going to do it with rifles. I don't know. Now, the way Sanders would put it, and this is the way it worked last time, too. Handguns were not exempt from the last semi-automatic assault weapon ban, or at least their magazines were not. Overnight, every magazine in the United States from that point on that had to be sold with a handgun had to be sold with a handgun with a 10-round magazine. You can still look around and find some of them, or there's some, there's some states where 10 rounds is all you're allowed to have. The problem with these bans that nobody talks about is what it does to weapons development. Now, for the gun grabber, they would say, well, what does it matter if we hinder weapons development? Well, it matters a great deal. The AR-15 gave rise to the better equipped M16s and M4s that are used in the modern military today. When I got out of the Army in 1990, and we at that time had just fielded the M16A2. It was significant in that it had a nice big round handguard made of plastic to hang on to. And it also went from the fully automatic function to the 3-round burst. Segue to when the assault weapons ban happened later on in the mid-90s, and there was no civilian outlet, development on the platform ceased. Let me take you back real quick. Let's see. I've got enough time for that. Let me take you back real quick. In the 80s, when we were getting ready to segue from the single stack 1911 45 ACP to a double stack, double figured Wonder 9, which turned out to be the Beretta, and which was designated the M9, all kinds of gun companies got involved in this. Ruger did, Smith & Wesson did, all kinds of gun companies got in this. Now, none of them, except for Beretta, won the contract. But the reason they put all that money and development into these guns was that they had the reasonable expectation that they could sell them on the civilian market, because this was heretofore unknown. Prior, and there were double stacks to be sure, but not nearly as ubiquitous as they are today. The most ubiquitous double stack of the time in the 80s was the Browning High Power. Then all of a sudden, we've just got, literally overnight in the mid-'80s, we are swamped with all kinds of guns. In the mid-'80s, some of the guns that were already being fielded out there in the world, like the CZ-75, were not available here. We could buy them in the military overseas, but you couldn't find them around here anywhere. So during the time of the assault weapon ban, nothing was developed. And when I got out of the Army, we didn't have optics. We didn't have lasers. We didn't have flashlights. We didn't have all the little ergonomic corrections they make to the gun to make it to where you can actually dial the platform into the way it's going to fit you. And it has to be dialed in because you're wearing, now they're wearing body armor, and they've got magazines slung all over them. They've got all kinds of gear slung all over them. It's got to fit in there some way. So in 2004, it had gone on for so long that no development had occurred. It was still the same weapon that I got out of the Army using in 1990. Then in 2004, that's when development began to kick back up after the sunset of the assault weapons ban. So these bans that they get out there where they would tell you that, well, what we're trying to do is just to make a safer America. It is the exact opposite. Militarily, it is the exact opposite, because it stops and hinders development. Because not everybody gets a military contract, but everybody's willing to try for one. 2004 forward, that's when we start seeing the advent of the quad rail and the flat top and the optic and all the other things that take the platform and turn it from a static rifle into the set of Legos that it is today. So in New Zealand, they've decided to go that route because they don't believe in God-given rights. So the question has become, do you believe in God-given rights? Obviously, Bernie Sanders doesn't believe in God-given rights. But it doesn't matter if he does or not, because he's a socialist. Socialists never believe in anything like that. But, yeah. That's what everybody's pushing for now as we look on at this event in horror. And everybody's trying to have that little knee-jerk reaction to it like they always do. I went out last weekend, and I shot 8 weapons as to film them and review them. I was being a mass shooter that day. Somebody that goes into a school with a weapon to kill children that they don't know, who wants to get his Facebook page looked at an awful lot, that is not a mass shooter. That is a rampage murderer. But here, because he's an anti-Second Amendment zealot, he conflates the terminology so that we get to be involved in this too. I'm in a gunfight, and when I pull this weapon up and put the sights on it, I'm going to address it the way I would in a gunfight. Now, the way I address one is fast. I'm not worried about if I miss 1 or 2. If I'm firing a string of 6 shots at you and I hit you 4 times in the gunfight, I just won the gunfight. I do want to hit you with all 6 times, and I own each and every round that comes out of that weapon. But in the sense of pragmatism, I don't know how much I'm going to be able to employ every single precept of good shooting. So I want to be fast. I want to be first. And I want to get hits. The vast majority of you are very responsible people, and you work for a living. You take care of your families. You take care of your home, and you take an active part in some phase of your community. Your time is one of your most valuable things that you have, so it is important for you to budget that wisely. So it is not only important to budget time for your defensive shooting practice, but it is critical to practice when you're doing that so that you engage in the kind of practice that's going to meet your needs. If you own an AR, then the reason to bring an AR into a gunfight is if you have to address multiple opponents. You can certainly do that with a handgun, but the beauty of the AR is the transition time with it, because it is bigger, it is longer than a handgun, and it's in its element. But while all that's fun, how much does that actually relate to what you do in your real life? How often in your real life are you probably going to come up on a barricaded antagonist? How often are we going to clear a building? Those kind of things are fun, and if you have the time and if you have the means to train with them, absolutely do it. But in the real day-to-day, that's probably not going to be a factor. And it's not going to be the kind of threat that you may have to deal with in the real world. It's far more likely that you're going to face a single armed robbery on the streets or in a place of business. There may be multiples there, you know. You may very likely have to deal with a carjacking or a road rage incident. Home invasion, of course, that comes up. These realistic threats are what we should be practicing for to deal with in our limited practice time. So, this is why I work on a very speedy pistol presentation, right? And first shot and hit. That's what I'm looking for. First shot and hit. Now, thankfully, I get in these conversations sometimes. People will say, well, Bill, a pistol caliber carbine is not nearly as good as a rifle. Well, that's true, but we've developed all this pistol caliber ammunition to be so much better now than it used to be. What's your argument again? First shot, first hit. You have just changed the dynamic of what's going on. Unless something, in my experience, most of the people you're going to face in a real self-defense situation are actually cowards. Even if you run into a group, a quick draw and a fight-stopping hit on an attacker, that may be the only shot you have to fire if you're facing 10 guys who watch you do this. Because who's going to know who you're going to point that weapon at next? So if that were to occur, maybe his pals are running. It's a very simple drill to actually, it's one to work on. And this is why I like it. One of the reasons, like tactical response, I would go to tactical response and take a class if you haven't taken one. Their fighting pistol class, one of the things they tell you is when you recognize you're in a gunfight, the first thing you do is you take a sideways step. Yeager refers to this as getting off the X. But when you take that sideways step, all of your law enforcement gunfighters of the earlier times of the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s understood that hitting something moving with a handgun is not that easy to do. So that one fast movement to your right, which can be a simple, stride, left or right, coupled with a speedy draw, well, now you're really increasing your odds. Or maybe you can actually get to cover. And movement and cover increase your chance of surviving a criminal attack. You should also think about the amount of time most of us spend sitting, whether it's in a chair or in your car. How many of us actually work the pistol presentation from a car? I have tried many different holsters. One of the reasons I don't personally, if you're the right body type, I think the appendix carry is the fastest carry method to draw a weapon from. If you're not, somebody that has a 32-inch waist and no stomach whatsoever, then you're going to have to look at something a little more on your side. Okay? Simple fact of, psychology, physiology, and just geometry getting in the way. So that's one thing you have to consider. The other thing is that a lot of things nowadays, like a lot of people have these concealed carry pants that actually do a very good job of concealing the gun, but when you're sitting, you can't draw your weapon because of the way the material is going to be pulled against it. So if you have to stand in order to draw your weapon, you're wasting time. If you're seated, you need to be in a position where if you are seated and you see the need to get into a gunfight, you need to be able to pull your weapon quickly and effectively, get that first shot off without standing. That's where, and that's where a lot of people find out, well, the way I'm carrying my gun is not the right way to carry it when you're seated. Then you have to take great care not to cuff your, when you're pulling your weapon up. This is where the hip side, strong side hip comes in real good because you're not sweeping your body with your weapon at any given time. From appendix, you're sweeping the whole tops of your legs. From a strong side, like say 3 o'clock, or if you're right-handed like me, you don't have to sweep your legs. The two things you need to think about: you need to be fast, speedy presentation, first shot hit. The next thing you need to be thinking about is I need to be able to do this while sitting down. Once you understand that and master that, please get in front of me.
If these people are firing weapons or throwing grenades or sending explosive kites and balloons,
to seize all formerly legally owned guns on any pretext they can manufacture. A few would be destroyed, but then the others would be quietly redistributed among an army of newly enfranchised protectors who will be curiously exempt from the compliance with the bans mentioned and all other gun control legislation. So a gun-free America is very flowery, but it's blatantly false. The selected protectors, individuals drawn from the carefully developed, totally dependent, politically reliable underclass, or thugs. You can make it sound as, well, it's for the children, it's for safety, it's for this, it's for the environment, it's for Gaia. No, it's for none of those things. It's for control. Very simple. It's just for control. Now, there's two ways we can go about this, right? We can. If you look at them and you look at what they're trying to do right now, they're trying to turn California into the model for everything they want to do. So they're trying to pass laws in the states right now to where the popular vote winner gets all the electoral votes. They're trying to do away with the electoral college altogether so it can just be a popular vote thing. And they want everybody to move into cities. They want to have population centers. And then those cities will be run sort of like New York, where Bill de Blasio is in charge of that city, and they're at everybody in New York City owes in all stuff there $64,000 every head per person, however you want to put it, and then they'll tell you what you can and can't have, and that's what they got in that all that stuff is in store. It's all to consolidate their power, and the only way they can actually do that is to disarm you. Vote as if that is the key, and we might actually pull this off peacefully. Is to disarm you.